Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Helena Loermans, who is coming to us from Odemira, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Portugal. She is originally from the Netherlands and had a career as a laboratory technician, working with a different kind of tissue. And she now combines the experimental skills and research skills that she honed there with her skills as a hand weaver to analyze the canvases, the weaving patterns in the canvases used by various great old master painters like Titian and Velazquez. And I discovered her while doing online research on the first weaving manual, which was published in 1677 by a weaver named Mark Ziegler, and is called in English The Weaver's Art and Tie-Up Book. I'm delighted that she could join us, and I am going to turn things over to her.
Virginia, for your nice words, and congratulations to all of you who are here with the beautiful works you've done. It's nice to see a Weavers Guild so active in weaving and showing and connecting. My talk is going to be about Lab O, and I'm really very happy that I was invited to present the work here about Lab O. Lab O, the laboratory for handwoven canvas, with this name and this image, was founded in 2017. It links craft, in my case, the weaving, with entrepreneurship. The workshop is a small enterprise, a small business. The technology is not only the technology from the X-ray images, which you see later, from the museums, but also I do work on a computer-aided loom, and the weave drafts are generated also in a computer software. Science is and art history is the part where the paintings are coming in, the old master paintings from 16th, 17th century. It's my passion. I love my work, I love weaving, I love my research. And I invite you all to join my pathway to this presentation and to this work. The best decision I made in my life, one of the best decisions, was going back to school at the age of 45. I went to the Liceo Foundation in Florence, and I was so happy to be a student again that I wish that the whole world would have that experience to go back to school. But at the same time, of course, that means that there also have to be teachers. So that made me decide to become one. I tried to get permission to build up a weaving school in an old abandoned school in the countryside where I was living by then, but that didn't work out. It was too much bureaucracy to get the papers done. Plus. So that's also one of the old Mac, and it still works. And I'm really happy that it does. I will give you later a little view of the other equipment that's necessary to work the loom, the interface. A little sidestep to Florence, where I was visiting here my master teacher and friend, Julie Holyoke. She was the former owner of this loom, and I met her for the first time when I went to Lisieux, to school, which was in Florence. And by then she had this loom for sale, and I remember saying, oh no, that's not for me, because it's too much to learn also the whole computer skill and technology, and weaving while weaving is already such a time-consuming art. But in the end, I changed my mind, and I'm really happy. And another curious thing is that she has been involved in the construction of this loom, which means in the connection of the loom to the technology, and that happened in the 80s. So the connection from interface technology to hand looms, to looms, started with hand looms, and only later then was applied also industry. Beside that, she has published a really beautiful book on digital jacquard design. So she has been really important in my textile pathway. Going back to Odemira, another loom that's in my studio is a 12 shafts floor loom with 14 treadles. And I used to work patterns that use mostly all the shafts and all the treadles, because I like to use as much possibilities from a loom as possible. And the other loom is a dobby. It's a mechanical dobby. I'm weaving here one of the canvases which did not use all the shafts, but this is also a dobby loom where the bars, I don't know how many of you know about the technology of these, but here instead of having an electronic interface, we have the bars that we plug the pins in to weave the pattern. If you want later in the discussions, you can all ask all the details about one of these looms. I'm really happy to share more information if needed. The products I make and what make my living after stopping this teaching, well, is that I'm weaving scarves. This one is in full cashmere. This one is in linen, where I use also some textile stripes in the weft to give it a little bit of a special touch. This is a tubular scarf, which is woven as a double cloth, so it has no seams. And I make little knots at the ends of the warp on both sides, so there are little knots that keeps the warp thread, in this case, in its place. And here this picture shows a piece of textile that came from the loom, from these colors. So where the warp is not woven, I cut them and make them little knots. And it's also to show, but you know that of course as weavers, also that even on the colors of one warp, we can make very different looking textiles when we change the color of the weft. Another product is made with a so-called technical yarn. It's Clima yarn, and it regulates the temperature. It's 60% superfine wool and 40% a poly column, which is also the material that is used for the t-shirts and in the sports, where they wick out the moisture. They regulate actually the humidity. It's a very comfortable yarn, very light, and even people who have allergies for wool tell me that this is really comfortable also for them. So I make baby blankets out of these, but also that started as baby blankets, but it's such a comfortable yarn that I also make scarves out of them. And also this product is very, very favored by the male clients. It's a very comfortable yarn. And then another product is started as a joke. It's so-called upcycling. It started as upcycling and it still is upcycling. The sun umbrellas, where I started with a frame that I found that was broken. The textile was broken. And I really found it such a shame to throw away the frame that was still in a good shape. So I started to weave them, and the textiles are selvages that come from a factory here in Portugal that only cuts selvages from textile rolls that are then used for clothing industry. So it's a kind of textile industrial waste. And this is another piece, one of what I once made for a competition. It's here I did put the textile stripes on the loom. It's a honeycomb on 8 shafts. And instead of having the threads on the loom, I just put the textile stripes in. And I made heddles with a bigger heddle eye. And because of it being so unorganized, kind of unorganized, I didn't even wind the warp on the back beam, but it was hanging with a weight to keep the tension. 2 study pieces from my jacquard weaving from the time that I was in Florence. And you can see that I love to puzzle. This is velvet, an uncut velvet, and it's made as a double cloth.
Wow.
If you want, I can later explain how I did it. And now we go to the canvases. These 4 rolls are canvases, are reconstructions, hand-woven in linen. And from left to right, it's the canvas that was used for a painting by El Greco, by Velazquez, Titian, and Caravaggio. An interesting thing is, and later I will come back to that, but then you have already seen the textile, that the one on the right-hand side is a different technique than the 3 other ones. So how did this work? How did this start? When I stopped traveling as a traveling school, I still felt the need to, and the wish actually more, to keep the teaching part up and also to share my knowledge and my experiences. So then I became a host entrepreneur in an European program where young entrepreneurs can come to a host entrepreneur's place where they then can be trained. And Marta Pokojovci came to me in 2014. She is an art historian and painter. And then for me, it was so obvious that, and so logic, that she would maybe try to weave her own canvases. So we started to weave canvases with a pattern, not being only plain weave. That's also because I always thought it must have influence for a painter if there is a texture in front of you instead of only a plain weave. So we started to weave these canvases. And in summer, my studio is open for visitors. This is my little dog, Joya. And at a certain day, a nice family came in, and the woman knew I showed her the canvases and I was talking about the project, and she knew, and she told me that Spanish painters in 17th century have painted on canvas with a pattern. So she left the name from El Greco, Maino, and her own name, and she now became also a friend or an enthusiast adept from the research. She is a restorer in the Prado Museum in Madrid. And when she was away, I started to search, and then I was really lucky to find in the internet a study document from a Portuguese young woman where this draft was, of this graphic draft, was published. And when I saw this, my heart really made like a little jump, because I knew that I was going to be able to weave it. And I also immediately thought that must be really something big, because a textile that has been hidden for so many years behind the paint and more nowadays between the lining canvases, you can just bring it to life again. So I started to work that to transform this graphic draft on my equipment that's connected to my computerized Loom, which is a Mac Plus, and it was already once in the repair, but it still works. And on the right-hand side, in the middle, the blue box is the software key. And on the right side, the other equipment is to load the cartridge, the little black box, that then goes into the interface, which then controls this Loom. So I wove the textile of El Greco's canvas, and I was really, really happy. This is the textile, and this is the painting, which is a painting located in the Iglesia de San Tomé in Toledo in Spain. And I just looked up before when you were showing your work, because I only know the sizes in meters, but it's 1400 by 1500 inches. So it's a huge painting, and it's on this textile. The nice thing of research is that once you start, you find more. With this El Greco, I had found the draft already complete as a draft, as a graphic. The second painting was a little bit more difficult. It's the Velazquez Supper at Emmaus. It's in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And here I found this publication, where you could see in the publication that the canvas has something happening in the back. And then I was received very kindly from the painting conservator the high resolution X-ray image, and from this stage on I had to decipher the pattern, which was very much more difficult. So, but I managed to find the repeat. That's the most difficult part, where the repeat is from one, let's say from one repeat, where it starts again. This is the textile. And so this painting in the Metropolitan is on this canvas. I must say that this superimposed pictures, they are not on scale. The textile, of course, is much smaller than the whole painting. That's not scaled. Virginia already talked about this book, and we must have found it somehow at some same time, which is actually curious. It's the Mark Ziegler oldest weaving manual, and it's from 17th century. So these textiles and the paintings are older. So it already was woven before there existed this manual. The way they write it, the patterns, is different from what we are doing now. And if you see on the left-hand side, it's not possible to decipher, but It's written in Old German language and in Gothic letters. So that is really very difficult. Although as a Dutch, I can understand German. I did have had German at school. And in the little bits and pieces that I read, I could see that there was much more information than only the patterns. And I was really, really very happy to find Patricia Hill's book. She reproduced the two earliest books on weaving, which is one from Mark Ziegler and the other one is Nathaniel Loermans. And so she already translated the whole text, and I have found already a lot of information which I also could share if anybody wants. Before I became a weaver, I did something else. And Virginia already mentioned, I was a laboratory technician working on a project on postnatal growth and differentiation of muscle fibers in mice, in normal mice, and also in mice with muscular dystrophy. That was a model for trying to find an experimental model trying to get more knowledge about the disease. It was a more histochemical and morphometrical investigation. So I looked very much on the cells and I defined the cells, and then histochemically they were also distinguished, and then I had to find the different types of cells so to get a classification. And it looks as if it's really very different of what I'm doing now. But if we look at this, then it's not so different. Here we see the paintings and the weave drafts of the canvases of that particular painting. And what I already mentioned a little bit is the one on the upper right corner is a different technique. That's the so-called lace, and you call it hook lace, I think, in your language. And the other ones are all MW patterns, twills. So the other one is not a twill. And interesting is that in the book from Mark Ziegler, there was no hook lace pattern. In the book of Nathaniel Loermans, there was one very small pattern on hook lace. But it did exist already earlier because Caravaggio painted in 17th century on this canvas. So yeah, so here this was the Caravaggio where we talked. These are the six textiles that I have done the reconstruction. I have done more, looked at more analysis, but I've only woven these 6 until now. I was lucky to present this work in a symposium organized by the Getty Foundation and hosted at Yale University, where I presented this poster, but I also did give there a workshop. And this was actually our very first plan, where Virginia and I have been spoken about, that hopefully I will one day come to you and we have a real workshop there. Because one thing is we see all these on screen, but then feeling and touching the textiles is something different. So the rolls are lying there, the different canvases, and there's a little loom where I have had by then threaded the Caravaggio canvas, because that's the only one that's on 8 shafts. All the others are on 12 or 14 shafts. And in the front, you see a little textile with a draft, which then I needed to do the weaving as a human loom, as I call it. So this, instead of having the threads in a loom, every participant has 2 threads in each hand. And as if it is 2 shafts. So if you lift one hand, it's shaft 1, and the other hand, it's shaft 2. For that, we have a very easy draft, and I assume that you all understand this graphic. So it's in 2 shafts. Now, if we go back and instead of each person has all the threads are in shaft 1 and 2, we can also imagine that 2 persons together have 4 shafts. Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we use this and we can weave a twill like that. And because it's also big, it shows up. Okay, this is another one outside and it's actually the same. And as I said, because it's so big, you then can easily make very quickly a piece of textile, and you can see in the front of this blue and white the difference if you weave it as a plain weave or if you weave it as a twill. And it really did help people, at least they said to me, the conservators, because in that symposium it were all painting conservators, it did help them to understand how a textile is constructed. Now, if we would try to weave this pattern from El Greco's canvas as a human loom, there is 1 repeat, 60 threads, so we would need 30 people in a row. And I'm still looking forward to do so. So it's going to happen, and maybe in, who knows, it's going to be difficult to organize it all, because if you have 30 people in a row, I must even think of how big the space should be. But it's a challenge. I do have some more little topics on Lab O, but I would like to ask Virginia how we are in time frame, and give you also the opportunity to ask questions about what I've said until now. Or
in the chat, there have been a lot of questions, so I think people would like to have a Q&A.
Well, this all,
yeah. So the people were wondering about, and also we have, I know Laura from the Getty may want to chime in here as well, but people were wondering about, wasn't the canvas primed with gesso?
I mean, first of all, I'm not a paintings conservator and not an historian. So if I give the answers and the knowledge is what I gathered during my study. I know that they were primed with rabbit glue and then a gesso layer, or Velazquez also used the clay in his the Seville clay, the red clay in his paintings. It's curious that in history, art history, technical art history, I would say almost everything on paintings has been researched, and at molecular level sometimes, until the canvas. The textile it's mentioned, and sometimes it's written that it's a pattern composed of several little diamonds or intertwined, but there is no registration on the textile and the textile knowledge. And that's actually one of my hopes and my goals, to preserve this knowledge and to make it visible again. This was the answer.
So if anybody else would like to, we have several
yes.
conservators.
I have a question, Helena. Thank you so much. So are the paintings taken out of the frames so that the fabric can be studied? Is the fabric studied from behind, or is it from the edging?
Well, there are a few possibilities. Most of the paintings are now relined. So there has been put a lining canvas on the back, and painting conservators know more about that, and that's also special technique. So that is not possible. That's why it's not possible to see the canvas from the back, only in a few, or if they are in the process of relining, that the old lining canvas has been taken away and then the other canvas is put on. So there are a few. I just analyzed one little piece of textile on a photograph from a Velazquez canvas, which was on the border, but mainly it's from X-ray images that are made in the museums. So that's where the technology pops in this project. So I receive high resolution X-ray, and that's also because now the X-ray images are so well of high quality, that it's possible to disappear. So there are maybe, now I can maybe say why the textile has not been researched, looked at. Also because you can't see it. And if you don't really analyze it and put it in a graphic, you think they are the same. Yeah, I mean, if you look at these two, like the left one and the one, not the third, they have almost the same. So I can imagine that that's also one reason. And also because of the computer programs in this, now it's possible to reconstruct it as a graphic, or to construct it as a graphic. And without that, I'm also almost sure that I would have not have done it, because there are repeats of 140 threads, both in warp and weft. Now, before you have done that all in your graphic with a pencil, and then from the different ones. So that's, of course, also maybe a reason why the textile, the patterns have not been looked at, I think.
And everybody is wanting to know, so why would they why use pattern textiles? Does it affect the art?
Of course, and that's actually, I laugh because that's the first thought that comes up in everybody's head, and that's the first question that comes to me. That's why I have this, that was my let's say, academic question on the poster. Why were patterned canvases used? I tried to send already so many messages to them, but they have not answered yet. I don't know. I don't know. But maybe I hope that these textile, these reconstruction, or let's say these bringing to life again, this layer which has been ignored and understudied, maybe that will then be a part of the puzzle, or solve a part of the puzzle of why they were using it. And it's very interesting, I'm very excited about the project that's happening now. It's in Seville, where they are reconstructing reconstructing the birthplace from Velazquez. So his house, and it's going to be a center, an educational center, where his life will be shown. Now, it's very interesting that the canvases that Velazquez used with a pattern are all from the Seville period. And this is a project which is also done by Factum Arte. It's a foundation in Madrid, where I'm in contact now with them. And they have just photographed all the documents on Velazquez's lives. And they're going to make facsimiles of these documents, which of course is a huge source of knowledge, of information. And I really hope, I hope probably somebody else, that we will find information about the canvases and where they were made.
I'm sorry, go.
Do you have a photograph? Can we see a photograph of one of the X-rays compared to what you figured out what the pattern was? Do you have an image of one of the X-rays?
Yes, I will go back. So this is the X-ray image of one of Velazquez's paintings, and I did put on my computer a loop so that I could even figure out more. And then I just start drawing, first in the bigger size or smaller, depends on. And then I start just to decipher how each line is. And I recently found a program where I really can put little lines on top of this image, because if you have to do it from there to your paper, then you lose easily track. So, but even then, I just published that one actually on my website, if you later go there. It's from another Velazquez painting. So I did have the textile, and I did put on the computer little lines on it, but then I still had to put the lines on a square paper to find out the logic of the pattern. And well, I hope, and I wish that somebody is also going to fall in love with this work, and that we can do it together, or that more people just, I don't know, just try to figure it out, and even to check it, because I double or triple or quadruple check it. But of course, it's still my interpretation. And there's one thing which gives me a certain tranquilidad, that in the patterns, of course, there is a restriction. Yeah, you can only have a certain way how it's woven, and not another way.
So on the very large canvases, where the paintings are very large, are they larger than the width of the largest looms that we know of? And if so, do they have seams? And maybe this is something you can't answer, maybe one of the...
maybe my conservator friends, but yeah.
I just wanted to... Sorry, this is Linnea Saunders, and I'm one of the painting conservators, but also a longtime member of the Guild. And I just wanted to I wasn't going to answer that particular question, but there are a lot of questions about why is it a canvas? What are the fibers that are used? And and just in general, I would say that conservators have for a long time documented through X-ray, or when there is not a lining canvas, we'll always document whether or not a selvage is present. So sometimes you'll have a selvage on two sides. Recently, I was at a painting from 1819, and the long sides has selvages, so I know that that was the maximum width of the woven canvas. It was a twill weave canvas, but not a complex twill. So we've been documenting weave count and weave structure.
Nice.
And it's just that these types are more rare, and usually because of their age, they have been lined. And then there also are projects where, I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but at Rice University, where he's using X-ray to...
Don Johnson.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, I'm in contact with him.
But in terms of, so for instance, if there are, Franz Hals would often do double portraits, and the portraits get dispersed for the years. So being able to use the weave structure and kind of anomalies within the weave structure to say this came from the same length of canvas, and it helps reattribute paintings as pairs amongst much other research.
I know about John Johnson's work and about the selvages. Of course, you only can see which is the warp direction when you have a selvage. You can be sure which is the warp direction. And yes, there is in the literature is written that the painters used these canvases because they were wider, because these are tablecloths and bed cover patterns. Now, my biggest question is where they could weave a width like more than 2 meters, or without having to use a selvage on a shaft loom. So for me, that's one of the big mystics, how you say, in this whole mysteries in this whole work, because the looms, what I've seen earlier, are only the width of what we could use with our hands. So I've been thinking maybe you could have thought about making it a double cloth, that's a double layer on one side open that you then can open. But these patterns are on looms with 12, 14 shafts, and I have not heard, but I hope to find by this also somebody who knows about that, but floor shaft looms with so many shafts and then so many treadles. That's also that's not an option. And I had an exhibition here in my little town, and then somebody came to me, and when I talked about these seams, and they all because they always ask, and it is a mystery. And he said that he remembered himself that in his grandmother's house, he and his little brother, when she had new sheets, and they were linen sheets by then, that they were trying to find where they were sewn together. So, yeah, so it can be that there are more seams in these big canvases.
Very often there is a seam if it's wider, yeah. And that's one of the things that also helps in determining whether or not a painting has been cut down.
Yeah.
Because if it's off center or that type of thing. I think there's a lot of unpublished information sitting in conservation files, because conservators have so many responsibilities, and it's very hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm looking forward, and I hope the next generation of researchers will get. Well, that's actually one of my let's say goals with this project, to bring it to life. Yeah. And
I think it's a wonderful project, and I would love to be involved in whatever way.
Thank you. So, yeah. And I mean, at the symposium in Yale, one of my, let's say, wishes was that conservators would reach out to me, and that we would start making a database. I mean, I've never made a database, and I know now a little bit how difficult that is, but there are for sure people who know how to do this, because there must be much more information. Not the same as that the weaving manual is only from the 17th century, but there must be documents about weaving patterns from earlier. I mean, the patterns were there, and they were too complex to be only in the braid.
There would be documents that are made from the cloth, but how you wove the patterns was a trade secret. And that's why what Mark Ziegler did was so radical, was that he broke the code of silence around around the weaving profession. And it's very much part of a lot of ferment that was beginning in that period, where people started to have different attitudes about, you also had the first dye manual, because it came a little earlier, but
and that's why maybe it's also, sorry to interrupt you, it's maybe also a reason that they are all slightly different. I have not yet found one draft that's exactly the same as one of the others. So there's always there's one more line, or there's a difference.
So is this still being continued, or are they using more commercial now?
Sorry, this project?
No,
I meant the canvas. The canvases is it more commercially? Are there more commercial ones used, rather than these sound as though they were specifically made by different artisans?
Yeah,
if you have not found duplicates.
Yeah, that's actually what I hope to find one day. I mean, imagine that in these documents about Velazquez, there is something written about the studio where these textiles were woven. And that could give us maybe a link or an idea. Yeah, because that's also one of the biggest questions that I have. How were they woven and where?
I'll just chime in here that earlier people were also asking, so the canvas that you are talking about is linen, and essentially in the early 19th century there's a transition from linen being the predominant, basically linen being predominant, to cotton being predominant, and that's something that in some of our talks with Textile Arts LA, Cameron spoke about that, I think. But yeah, as far as the hand woven pieces, what Chantal is asking, present day, there is linen, both linen and cotton available in art supply stores for painting supports. But this is just a, an early use of a more complex weave for
and then there's also sometimes the question of if it's linen or hem, and that
Right.
I know that's very difficult to distinguish from fibers, from the two different fibers. There's a study done in Evora here where they try to make this to distinguish. But I've not looked at fibers. And I'm also only using, I use industrial linen, of course, and by then there was no industrial linen. And I'm actually also curious how they could spin such thin yarn by hand.
Yeah.
I mean, there's also for me as a weaver, and are so many questions still. That's why I'm also interested that I'm in this weavers community now, because yeah, I hope all together we will just find the answers to these questions.
Helena, I was also wondering if you had wet finished your pieces.
Sorry, wet finished? Yeah.
You had wet finished any of your lengths of fabric, because they would have, when they were stretched, they would have been wet, and then the glue applied, and then gesso applied. So how the canvas reacts to that would
that's another very interesting project which I hope somebody once will pick up. And I had already a short conversation about that with Christina Young from Glasgow. Which we are thinking of trying to do some pilot experiments, because yes, of course, that's very, very interesting. And now at the moment, Factum Foundation in Madrid has 2 canvases, and they are putting these layers on it. So, but that's all a very, very young, let's say, project, because it started actually because of these Zoom meetings that I knew about them. And so, but that's one of the things. And my canvases, I'm mainly focused on the preservation of the pattern, of the structure of the canvas. And yes, I do use the thread. If I make the reconstruction, I use the thread count that's in the publications by the conservators, and then I use the equipment like the reeds that I have, so it's not always exactly the reed that I should use if I want to divide the threads in the reed. But yes, I try to get as close as possible. It's mainly to preserve the technical drawings, the drafts.
Go ahead.
I have a quick question. My name is Laura Rivers. I'm a painting conservator and I'm not a weaver. And I have a question I'd love to put to people who really know these fabrics. Helena, I had the chance to see one of your sample books, which was really revelatory for me in terms of being able to see the canvases. Prior, I was really only seeing on x-rays. And to be clear, I actually don't get to work on Spanish paintings very often, or Italian. I work earlier and later. But I encountered one of these canvases on a Zerberon and I was just fascinated. Yeah. And I wonder, just the experience of stretching these fabrics, particularly at scale, I just wonder if they move differently on the bias in terms of how they shift when you're stretching them on a large wooden stretcher. And I wonder if that was part of the appeal. And then someone else, I believe Kat, mentioned durability of the canvas. So I'd love to hear any of the weavers speak to those 2 questions, if at all possible, or Helena.
The first about the stretching, I have not done much stretching things. And as I mentioned earlier, that hopefully that's going to happen with Christina Young, because she does stretch, mechanical stretch research. Perfect. And yes, and that would then be on the Caravaggio canvas to start off. The second question, I'm sorry that I lost that.
I believe it was Kat Harada who raised the thought that perhaps the fabrics would be more long-lasting than a typical plain woven canvas.
I don't know. I don't know.
I was also thinking, because the texture of the canvas would still be evident, and it still is evident on the surface of the paintings now, perhaps from weave emphasis from lining, but because these artists are working more broadly with more thick-applied paints, and it's more gestural, that the way the canvas kind of pulls the paint off the brush, I just
yeah.
one sees a difference between painting on canvas versus painting on a wooden board. It does have a very different feel in terms of the actual experience of painting.
Yeah. I remember once somebody seeing me when they saw the canvas, they say, "Oh yeah, of course, there's much more surface to grip the first layer."
They're also incredibly appealing from a materials standpoint, and all artists are materials fascinated.
Yeah, there must be a reason. Maybe it was only like El Greco that he just said, "Mom, can I use your tablecloths? It's so nice." I don't know.
Helena, do you have an image of the selvage umbrella open? Because you showed it closed. Do you have something with it open?
Yes, I can. Let me see. I go back now. It should come up. You can already see it.
Oh, yes. Beautiful.
Is it visible?
Yes.
Yes, beautiful. Yes, I didn't realize this was open. Yes.
Yeah, and I have a Facebook page where you can also find more of these.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left, and Helena has done a little bit of research on tablecloths as depicted in paintings, as opposed to hidden behind the paint. Do you want to do a little short presentation on that, Helena? You have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's see. So Titian painted the Supper at Emmaus in 1530, and he painted a tablecloth. Okay, so then in a moment we can see a close-up from the left corner. This painting in 1530 is on a plain weave, and he painted the tablecloth in this pattern. Now this is very similar to this pattern from the Vandermin family, which then, let's say 15 years later, he painted the Vandermin family on this textile. And I found this in the X-ray. This is not an X-ray, this is an infrared images on the website of the National Gallery London, where you can see on the right corner, you can see the pattern. So what I thought, okay, no, this still goes further. This piece is in the collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum, and it came across me when I was looking there for linen textiles. It's from 1400, 1500, and it also has almost that same pattern. Now when I saw these both textiles, left is from the Vandermin family and the right is from the Victoria and Albert. At first I thought, oh, they are the same. So then I started to, in my dream, start to think, imagine he had the tablecloth, and 15 years later, he painted on that tablecloth. First he painted it on the first painting, and he painted then on the tablecloth. And there is still a little piece in the Victoria and Albert Museum. But then, unfortunately, they are slightly different. So this is not the same pattern, but they are very, very similar. Now let's see. Another tablecloth is in the Autumn Tryptage from 1515. Now I must admit that I have not yet, I don't know now if this is on a wooden panel or not. But the tablecloth also has a pattern, and this information about this painting I found in Patricia Hill's book, where she writes about the Autumn Tryptage and this pattern. This is an image that a Facebook group friend of mine sent me. He has a tablecloth, what he bought on a flea market. And it has also this kind of pattern. And this is an image of a canvas from a painting from a Portuguese painter. It's from 1500. Now, I just started first a rough analysis, and I already saw that the tablecloth and the painting, the canvas from the Portuguese painter, are slightly different. There are more lines. And then I did finally work all the three of them out. So they all have the same, let's say, basic forms. If we look at the darker square with the white inside and I'm sorry that I don't have a pointer here. I wish I could point it. But then the whiter with the little black inside. But there are more lines in between. And if you look at the upper right, left part of each draft, they have all a different threading. So one is a W and then goes immediately on to, let's say, the M. And the other one is a W and then separate from the M. And then the third one between the W and the M with an extra, I mean, it has extra things. There are lines, which then makes that the patterns look almost the same, but they are all woven differently. And this was my little extra of
Great.
tablecloths, paintings, and how the patterns then are woven on the loom. So they look almost the same, but they are all slightly different. But I'm really I would be so happy if from, I don't know from where, but if students or not students or others would just join and well, join Lab O, I would say.
Great. And tell people what your website is.
It's www.labo.pt from Portugal.
So labo.pt.
PT.
Yeah.
So I have one question. It seems to me that, especially when you look at the painting of the tablecloths and then look how the tablecloth is used as the canvas, what about the concept of recycling?
Yeah.
Because people are people and human nature is what it is.
Sure. Yeah. It's a very plausible reason.
Mm-hmm. Very exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's also exciting for me. I mean,
yeah. It touches me really well. I love it.
Thank you very much for joining us, and thanks to everybody for coming. And as I said, our next Zoom meeting will be August 8th with Karina Gromer, continuing our series of turning the disadvantage of not being able to meet in person into an advantage of getting speakers we couldn't ordinarily have.